This is the DDPai Z50 4K dual channel dashcam. I was super interested in this camera for two reasons. First of all, it has 4K recording with an IMX415 sensor. And secondly, DDPai has this D2 save technology that they've been bragging about, where supposedly the NAND flash in the camera provides a backup to the SD card in case the SD card is corrupted while recording. So not really sure how I'm going to test that out, but we'll find out as we go along. Just a heads up that DDPai did send me this camera for review. They didn't have a say in the reviewing process or really any input in terms of what I think about this camera, but please do keep that in mind while you're watching. The Z50 includes everything needed to get started with a basic installation. The two cameras themselves, the cables that run between the cameras, a power cable, and a 12 volt to 5 volt USB adapter. It is USB Type-C for power, so if this installation is an upgrade from an older camera, the cabling may need to be replaced. Looking at the camera body itself, we're starting with the good things that I like about this camera, its design. It's sleek and minimalistic and blends in with my car's interior. When it's stuck to the windshield, the camera doesn't really stand out other than the gold 4K badge on the front. And it's a good thing that the camera is so low profile because this camera is not removable from the sticky mount. There's no separate mounting piece, so the only way to unattach it from the windshield would be to completely unstick it and remove it from the car. The installation kit does include a couple static stickers for easy removal, but this camera is more or less fixed in one car and more suited to those who want to keep it in the vehicle, not for places with high theft or people who want to move the camera between two cars. The user interface is super straightforward, but that's because it's also super basic. The only things that can be done on the camera is a video preview, video playback, and changing a few of the minimalistic settings. The only advanced setting here is formatting memory card, while everything else needs to be done on the app. From the perspective of the physical hardware, this camera is much nicer designed than I would have expected for the price point. The lack of advanced settings and the starting price point of $99 make it geared towards a beginner dashcam user who basically can't mess it up because there's no settings to do so. That's why this next part of the video was such a challenge to write, because I come from the perspective of an advanced dashcam user who wants to tweak settings, optimize the dashcam where I can, whereas this camera really doesn't offer much in the way of optimization. I want to make it clear before I get into my big criticism of this camera that from the perspective of basic dashcam functionality, turning on with the car, recording the drive, and turning off when the drive is complete, this camera has worked exactly as expected. But you may have noticed something a bit off about the video quality, and that's because the video is only filmed at 25 frames per second. This camera does have a real 4K capable sensor, and I believe that the processor inside of it is also capable of 4K at 30 frames per second, but for some reason it's stuck at 25. For some markets, 25 frames per second is alright because that synchronizes with the 50 Hz power. Here in North America, not having a 30 frames per second option is kind of unacceptable. Using the app to lower the video resolution from 4K to 1600p does not increase the frame rate. The first couple clips here have been filmed in H.264 mode, which is the default mode of this camera. H.264 is overly compressed at a whopping 27 megabits per second. Changing the H.264, H.265 video setting requires loading the app and connecting to the camera by Wi-Fi. I would highly recommend using H.265 mode. Even though the bitrate is the same, there is substantially less compression artifacts. So that's this camera's biggest downside, that it's stuck at 25 frames per second and the bitrate is quite low. Considering that this camera is geared towards novice users, it's a little frustrating that it requires loading the app to switch between H.264 and H.265 mode. Most new dashcam users wouldn't know how to do this or even why to do this. I don't know enough about DDPai's history in terms of firmware updates to say that they'll ever release a firmware update with 30 frames per second modes. If you're in a market with 50 Hz power, then 25 frames per second is fine, but here in North America, like I said, at night it causes a little subtle flickering on some streetlights and it just tends to be less smooth. Higher frames per second otherwise just means more opportunities to capture the license plates of fast-moving vehicles, so having more is generally better. Other than that, video quality during the day is fine. There's a decent amount of detail. Color balance is a little bit wonky in some situations, and occasionally the camera does blow out highlights, especially with the rear camera. The rear camera is an average quality 1080p thing that's basically supplementary to the front camera, with the video being a bit too bright in some situations, especially white cars getting blown out and the detail being lost. It also operates at 25 frames per second. This camera's simplicity just means that there's no way to adjust that. There's no exposure adjustments in the menu on the app. And there we go, we've gone full circle back to this camera's lack of adjustability, the basicness of the user interface, and the inability to tweak the camera to user preference. And you know what? It's a $99 dashcam. Some little things here and there are forgivable. It's clearly meant for beginners, and the lack of adjustability is fine if it just gets everything else right. For example, having a rear camera included in the package at this price point is really cool and really great. However, if it's included, it needs to get the exposure right, because right now license plates are often not readable, and not on account of the camera only being 1080p, it's because at times the camera is too bright. In terms of other things that could be improved with a firmware update, here's an audio sample.
Synchronization, 3, 2, 1. Alright, let's do an audio test with this dash cam. We're driving along the highway at about 60 kilometers per hour. 4:45 p.m. at night, almost dark. Some of the darkest days of this year, basically. We're coming up to a huge traffic jam because it is rush hour, and as much as I dislike driving in rush hour, occasionally there's things we have to do. For example, I'm going to visit my grandma, so that's pretty important to me. Anyways, coming into Richmond, BC here.
And finally, a look at this dashcam's app. Where the camera doesn't have very many settings, the app is super important, and this one seems to work fine on my Samsung S8. Upon launch, there's a video preview, and playback options are given a timeline that can be scrubbed through. Like most other dashcams, a full resolution video downloads pretty slow, but this camera does generate a small video file at the same time as a larger one, making it a little bit faster for a quick transfer, as long as resolution isn't needed. The settings offered are super basic and minimalistic, and some things are hidden in the app in odd places, for example the kilometer and miles switching. My overall conclusion is that, well, I wish this camera had 30 frames per second modes. As it stands now, it turns on, records, and turns off, so basic dashcam functionality does work fine, but there are so many little things, little tweaks that need to be made. It's just a super budget camera, so there's no guarantee that firmware updates will be made. DDPai has been around for quite a long time in the dashcam space. Thing is that the $99 price point is extremely competitive for dashcams. There are several single lens cameras that are excellent from reputable brand names, and there's a lot of Amazon junk out there. This camera will be better than most of that Amazon junk because it does have a super capacitor instead of a battery, but it lacks the polish of a mature dashcam that's been on the market for a long time. I've sent my suggestions to DDPai now, including some other little minor firmware tweaks, and we'll see if they can pull it off, if they can pull through and turn this camera into something I could recommend. It's not a good idea to buy a piece of tech based on potential firmware updates that could possibly, maybe happen on a wish and a promise. Thanks for watching. I know it's been a while since I've made a video and lots has been going on, but hopefully there'll be more soon, maybe?
I'm gonna test out the DDPai D2 save thing today. I've got a fake capacity memory card here, and first of all we're gonna test to see if the camera detects that it is fake capacity, and then we're gonna bump the camera to simulate an incident and see if it saves it to the internal NAND, because this little tiny memory card here is going to corrupt the video pretty much instantly.
Formatted successfully.
Alright, so it didn't immediately detect the fake memory card and it says it's recording. So let's go for a drive and see what happens. About a minute after putting the fake memory card in, it started telling me out loud that there was an issue with the memory card, which is great. It's good that it tells you that there's a problem. It also popped up this little help window that sort of gives you a bit of an idea of what's going on, so that's a super nice touch. We're just going to drive around a little bit and simulate an emergency record, and then see if we can get the footage off of the camera itself. Why is it winking at me? Honestly, it's not looking good. There's nothing in the emergency folder here, and I can't find any setting to access the D2 save. I definitely caused the camera to lock some footage when the bad memory card was in there, so it should have theoretically backed it up to the internal NAND. But yeah, I can see all of my drive from the drive home on the good memory card, but there's nothing locked. There's nothing under the emergency folder. So I've got no idea how to access this. I'm honestly not sure if it's just a failure in my testing technique, because I did use a bad memory card. I did cause the camera to lock some footage with the bad memory card in when it knew there was a bad memory card in there. I'm not sure if I have to access the camera through a computer or if it overwrites the footage right away or what. Needless to say, if it's this difficult for me to access the footage, this isn't exactly a system that could be relied on in an emergency. Just get a good quality SD card, then you don't even have to mess with this.